Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's a little cloudy, little cloudy.
Little cloudy, storm clouds in the background there, yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Where am I?
Clearly in a Roman province, but this isn't Rome itself because it's too small and not quite constructed properly. So it's on the periphery, somewhere from Spain over through North Africa into the Middle East. So I don't know exactly where. There were too many of these places. So where exactly?
This is Al Jam. This is in Tunisia.
Tunisia. Okay.
Yep.
Near
So you were
Carthage.
dead on in the middle of your arc as you drew it.
Yeah.
Uh, this is called El Jam. I'm sure it was called something else, or this is the ancient Roman amphitheater in Tunisia.
Hmm.
Interesting picture.
Interesting picture. Interesting that it's still standing that well,
It's
given
amazing.
all the turmoil in that area. But
It's amazing. Yeah,
yes,
it really is. Um, so today's topic, Deirdre, is about questions.
it
It's
is
about
about
questions.
questions. Yes.
And we can title this, we'll probably title this because you have given me permission to publish on the Substack because you control Substack. Um, that I'm publishing a paper that's coinciding with this called What I Would Tell a University President About AI and if they asked. Now,
Right.
we've had one ask us, so we have, in fact, told them, but this is what I would tell all the rest. And I figured if we've told one, we should tell others. And because we work with it every day, and we taught at Columbia, and you teaching, me teaching together at times. And so we have a little bit of a background in both business, education. Now we've spent a lot of time on this, and we, of course, built companies. And actually, in some cases, we built them together. And so we have a pretty good idea of what this is and how it could be applied. And what it's interesting and what it's going to be interesting, I think, to our audience here, other than the people that might join us because of what the subject is or what the title is, the subject's going to be the same. It's this idea of questioning the AI models in the right way. And this is a skill that we are going to explain not only what that is and why, but it's all about the question. And why is that important? And why does it matter for a senior leader, not just to be able to lead their business, but also to take advantage of what you and I believe is a capability that we are given now by the marketplace that will provide incredible leverage, is providing incredible leverage, will provide incredible leverage going forward. And we'll get into not only how that leverage exists today, but how it multiplies over time. So this is not something that's going to be a fad that shows now and then. Yes, there are aspects of it where use of it for doing certain things will probably decline, but the fundamental ability to provide that leverage, we believe will sustain for a very long time into the future. So, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about and get us ready to talk about this in more detail.
All right. Let me provide a little context here. That we've been giving podcasts for a long time now, a lot of them showing the use of AI models. We get questions from people saying, in effect, slow down. I'm not quite following what you're saying. Go a little deeper here. And we're doing a series of in-depth looks at specific topics at the request of people. Now, you're calling this podcast something about what you would tell university professors. I titled this in my mind, Can You Ask the Right Questions? Same thing, same topic, and that this would be a skill that we would hope would be taught in universities. It's the whole idea of how do you learn a topic? And it's easy to see in the world of AI or working with AI models when you think in terms of the human machine partnership that you and I talk about. You have your AI model. And a lot of people just pull up a model, ask a question, take that question as the answer, pull it out of the machine and hand it in. Well, please, that's really just a very first step. And odds are significantly that whatever the answer you got out of it is wrong or inappropriate or out of context. The concept of the human machine partnership is that it's the human who drives the machine, the human who interacts with the AI model of choice to get, after a 5-step process, to get the output that's needed to accomplish something. A reminder to people about what that process is. You start by asking some questions, and they should be the right questions about the topic. We call that the reference step. Then you work with the machine to refine the output from the machine. Then the human provides context. That's the third step. Feeds information into the machine that the machine in the fourth step, synthesis, is going to take and change the answers, go back and work toward refining answers and getting closer and closer to what the human driving this whole process needs. And then in the fifth step, finalize, the human takes over and does the finalizing based on that human's knowledge, judgment, instincts, all of those human leadership characteristics to get the right thing that can be used in a situation. So what's really key here when you think about this process is knowing how to drive the machine, knowing how to lead the machine. And the way you lead a machine is through the questions. That's why knowing how to ask the right questions is so very important. A couple of parallel points to this that we sometimes hear the tech leaders say, but our machines are getting better, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they may be getting more powerful electronically, but not in terms of output. So however much more powerful the operations of the machine are, you still need to ask the right questions, provide the right context, take the output and work with it to make it something appropriate. You still need to know how to ask the right questions. We also hear people saying, wow, these are great search tools. I get the, great results I need. Well, search, the way you and I define it, Tom, is simply what we'll call a tool use, a very simple use. If you're going, and by the way, the quality of your search results, everyone knows, depends on the quality of the questions you ask. So let's not forget that. But if you're going to use these machines in a higher level way, the way that you and I have been talking about, you need to be able to ask the questions that move it away from the very simple search type results into the contextual results that identify opportunities, give you insight, help you frame something, help you provide context, help you structure, help you synthesize, and so forth. All of that is question driven. And if you don't ask the right questions, and this is where it becomes very important to understand this, that these machines respond to your questions in prediction. They go back and look at how they've been trained, look at the information they've been trained on, and come up with what they perceive is the likely response given the question you ask. And you and I have shown in some of our podcasts that if you don't guide the machines in the right direction, they will just decide to predict in this direction instead of in that direction. So you need to be able to stop and capture when a machine starts going in a different direction to get it back on track. And that's why you need, another reason why you need to be asking the right questions and always, always be bringing your own human knowledge, judgment, and instincts to your interaction. So I've been talking a while now, Tom. Let me throw it back at you.
Okay. So, um, where to start here? One of the points is that, and this is a subtle point that matters for context, that as you and I did when we went through the education system in our early lives, the scarcity factor was information. And especially when you went into business or you studied economics, you start learning about the power of or the damage that imperfect information can provide.
Right.
Now, on the entrepreneurial side, people would say, I'll take advantage of that imperfect information. Do you really know what the market prices are for various things? And used cars is a great example of a business that did very well. Used anything for a long time was good because again, it was the lack of perfect information. And the increase of the information that's been available over the last number of years has done away with some of these businesses, and they had to become much more institutional of setting a margin on the market price, and then because they actually became real, instead of imperfect markets where you can demand high margins and high prices and make a lot of money on a return. Those margins and returns have gone down for certain segments of our economy or the developed or the more advanced economies where the information is no longer imperfect. It's much closer to being perfect. And so that scarcity is no longer really information. With clicks on a machine or the small machine you carry in your pocket or in your purse or whatever device you carry with you, backpack or whatever, um, that device now has access to an unbelievable amount of information. And it's not only access, but it's immediate access. And it doesn't take a lot to learn to be able to do that. You can use a search engine. You can use one that's combined with an AI engine. That's what Google's doing, Microsoft's doing, other people are doing. So you're getting what you and I would call a more advanced search capability. It's still search. It's not what you'd be using the kind of way we use the models to do, but it's still incredibly valuable. And we care about the difference because in one, you're using way less resources than you are in the other. So there's a resource use. And then there's also the issue of what is it doing? Is it responding to your precise question? And is that what you want it to do? So when you and I want it to respond to a precise question we're asking, we don't turn to an LLM. We go to a search engine because it will respond in a much more deterministic way. 2 plus 2 equals 4. What is 2 plus 2 equal? And it will tell me 4, hopefully. Um, you ask a lot of LLMs and it'll go, it depends, right? And so this is the thing of knowing how to use what when is really important. That's the scarcity argument. We think fundamentally the change we've seen is this change from um, scarce information to abundance of information. And we've seen that change happen. We've lived through it. That no longer is there. So that changes the dynamic of how you and I deal with that, no matter what we're doing, running a company, studying a subject, researching something, trying to look for opportunities. The second thing is now we've got these models that do that really well. They help us do it. So as you and I were saying, Deirdre, it's much like you and I used research librarians and you were telling me a really funny story about Hoover. So why don't you take a second and describe this analogy you and I are using to what a great librarian does for you.
Right. When I was at Stanford, I wrote a senior honors thesis, and I did some of my research at the Hoover Institution, which had a card catalog, which was what they had right now. Also, I did a lot of research at the main library, which at Stanford, you'd walk up this impressive stone staircase, and around behind you, there was this enormous balcony of card catalogs where you can find any resource. But you had to know where to look for the resource. You had to have a certain amount of knowledge about what you were looking for Or else you could spend the rest of your life just pulling out each one of the 50,000 drawers of cards in the catalog system, looking for something that was appropriate. If you were going to use your time efficiently, you had to be able to hone in very quickly to the drawer you wanted to access. And I was telling you this, Tom, because this is the equivalent of doing research using one of these AI models. And given the zillions upon zillions of data sets these models have been trained on, it would be the equivalent of searching through 50,000 drawers of a card catalog system, unless you knew how to drill down to the right question. To not only get yourself in the ballpark, that's the first step, but also to then take it to where you are getting to the point where you can find the sources that you specifically want to look at. That's the story I was telling you. More humorous when I was telling it before, but
Well,
that's the gist of the whole thing.
the whole point, though, is that what you valued was that ability to do that. And I was telling
Yes.
you the story about when I was at Columbia doing doctoral work. There were two librarians that helped me enormously in this one subject that I was trying to research, that one in one location, one in another. And it was not only that this one librarian who was in one of the schools at the university wasn't even at the main library. Um, she not only knew what was in her library, but she knew what was in the main library. And one of the things about Columbia is each discipline has their own specific library, the more advanced aspect of it. So each one of the disciplines around the campus, you've got the library right there in the building, along with the main library that you're talking about. And unfortunately, we don't have these beautiful dramatic steps. You know, we used to. That used to be the library. That was low library that everybody sees. That's now the administration building. Across the quadrangle is the today's library. But regardless, this woman not only knew and what was in her library, she knew what was in the main library, but she also knew what was at Princeton and what was at Yale and what was at Harvard, because we had this collaborative. Every university does.
Right.
The Ivies have this ability to reach into, and within a day, you could have a book from one of those libraries brought over to the main library for your help. So it was incredibly powerful. But knowing these people and being able to access them, they were really valuable. And you're standing in a line waiting to talk to them because they have huge ability to do this one piece of work. And I know you want to add something here.
Just to make a connection here, that part of the training of these librarians is knowing how to ask the question.
Yes.
Remember, we're still focusing on how you need to know how to ask the question so you can drill down to the topic that you really want to know, not some nice, interesting facts, which could keep you lost in 50,000 drawer card catalogs forever, frankly, but how to quickly get to this information. And that's, to this day, even still, one of the main values in going to a librarian and working with librarians.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. What is that process? That process is, you and I would call it in business, that's qualification.
Right.
That's a qualification process. And so if you said to me, well, what's the analogy? I would say in academia, it would be somewhat like a librarian is to their library, or not only their library, but what they have access to. In our world of business, it would be the same as a great salesperson or a great biz dev person, because they qualify before they recommend or try to sell. And what they're doing is they're trying to learn from you what it is that your requirements are. And then in that process, they're going to position themselves around your needs so that they can make the best sale to you and hook into your needs. I know you have, again, something you want to say.
Just simply want to point out, in many organizations, this is called the knowledge management system.
Yes.
that the whole science of knowledge management arose, I guess it was in the 1990s, where organizations were starting to focus on their data and information and try to figure ways to capture it and organize it so that people could tap into the information more quickly. And it was in the mid 90s that some early knowledge management systems were put in place. And now the advent of the AI models is just advancing the field of knowledge management. And in the knowledge management world, they talk about knowledge trees. How do you ask a question to get to the next question that gets you to the information? So even in that sort of system that is built to help you find the information, it all depends on being able to ask the question that gets you further along in the process so you eventually get to exactly the information you need.
And you think about, Deirdre, in a business, we frequently, one of the businesses that I did before you and I actually knew each other, um, we were constantly looking at how much of the information in a business could be accumulated and put into a knowledge management system about the performance of the company. The one thing we were having very difficult time with is what you and I might call, and at the time we called, institutional knowledge that was in the head of the experts that had been around a long time and had a lot of experience and knowledge, functional knowledge, but were narrow. These people were generally narrow. They knew the subject cold. And this is the point that that knowledge, they were the experts, and they were where you turned when you had a problem. They were the equivalent of a librarian, but in a different way. It was experience of going deep in their case. What a librarian did that was different was going broad across the subject. And that's a really different, completely different skill. And that's why these people don't look alike. When you when you find a librarian, they have a different set of capabilities and they have a different way of approaching their work than does the expert. The one thing they share, though, is the questioning, or as you and I would say, the qualifying. They're really good at that. And that's what you see. Again, it's a human characteristic that we've seen in people, the librarian, or the person with what you call institutional knowledge. They've
Right.
just been around a long time and nobody's written it down. And yes, you can have those people retire or move on to do other things, although they rarely do. They usually like to stay in their lane because they really enjoy it and they like that knowledge that they've got. Sometimes that's the hard part, is getting it out of them to put down so you can document. Now, the problem with that is that everything changes. And so part of the issue with institutional knowledge is many times it doesn't change with the world underneath them. So that's a whole nother issue that you have to deal with in terms of this. And what makes the power of what these capabilities are now with the AI models that can look over vast amounts of data is they don't care if it's brand new data or it's old data. They'll be able to pull it together, and if it's well labeled, they can actually triage it for you, just like a good librarian could. And so this is the capability that is many times lacking because that we have trained ourselves, and as we've talked about in before, the people that have advanced through many businesses is they've developed this functional knowledge, and
Mhm.
that's how they're valued. And that functional knowledge is what gave them the ability to progress through their careers. What you and I are signaling is it's more than that these days. So I'm going to stop there because I don't want to go too far on this subject, on that particular subject, but I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Well, remember that what we're doing in this video, we're defining terms that people haven't necessarily picked up on when we presented some of our podcasts. And the term you're starting to reach for is our AI insight layer. And let me talk more about how this would work, because this seems not to be fully clear to some of our listeners. That the whole idea behind this insight layer is, well, I'll use the term knowledge management again, to capture all of the information that is useful to the organizations across all of the functions, get it up out of the silos into common areas where everyone can tap into it. In addition, to go external to the organization and bring in marketplace information, competitive information, industry information, demographic information, any other information that would be useful to the people working in the organization, so that you create this body of knowledge. We're articulating it as an insight layer. It's not necessarily like storm clouds hanging over an organization. It is organized and put someplace, but it is made accessible to everyone within the organization. That's your layer. Now, what this means in relation to AI models is this: that the combination of having this massive database of information, external and internal, makes everyone's job within the organization different. That people have traditionally worked, as you were talking about earlier, Tom, functionally. If you're in marketing, you're in marketing, and that's it. Like if you're in human resources, you're in human resources. And people within each function would usually work toward functional goals. But someone like you or me, Tom, looking at this kind of structure, say there are vast missed opportunities and potential for higher level performance in such a structure. While the use of AI models to be able to ask questions of this massive database, in addition to what other information the model has access to, gets people up out of their silos and working toward the benefit of the organization as a whole, toward organizational goals, not functional goals, working towards solutions that benefit the whole organization, not just functional solutions. So that if you're in marketing, you may say, oh, I need to do some social media work. What do I need to know in terms of marketing and social media work? While if you had a model, AI model, and were tapping into the organizational structure, you could say that social media is broad. It allows me to access people who want to interact with our organization across all functions. So what do I need to know as a marketing person that it would benefit the organization as a whole and work toward growth goals if I started to communicate this through social media? You see the difference. It's the difference between, say, explaining the benefit of a product. That's a marketing thing down in the marketing function. And then explaining how the product structure of the organization as a whole makes everyone's lives easier in this, that, and the other way. So it gives an organization great ability to tap into the knowledge, judgment, instincts, and abilities of all people, get them up out of their functional limitations, and have them thinking in a way using the available data and information to benefit the organization as a whole. And the AI model is a tool for asking the questions. But now you start to understand why asking the right questions becomes important. How does this marketing person phrase the questions that get the information about what does the organization do for people's lives as a whole? It's a skill to stop thinking narrowly about what a product does and then what does the organization as a whole do? Who has that information? How do we connect that information to the marketplace information that's in here? What are our competitors saying about this sort of thing? What do the customer research surveys say about this sort of thing? combine this information, or to use our words, synthesize this information, and continue asking the questions to come up with output and finalize that output that you can then put out in the marketplace to benefit the organization as a whole. That's how it works with the AI models, the AI insight layer, and someone down in a silo getting up out of the silo, using a model to tap into the data and information to benefit the organization as a whole. That was a very quick and broad example, Tom.
Yes.
And you and I could sit around and give example after example for the next 5 hours. But I hope I'm starting to clarify for people how the use of the models interacting with this AI insight layer helps individuals work for the benefit of the organization as a whole. But it all comes down to being able to ask the right questions.
Yes. So let me see if I can describe it um, in a comparison way. Because one of the things somebody who is cynical about this could say, we've been doing that, Deirdre. We've had massive databases. We've sanitized information. We've put them in these databases. Then we've had query engines that go in there and do that. And what we've been training people to do is prompt engineering to go after these queries. And so what you're describing exists today. And we would say, no, let's talk about what is the difference in what we're talking about here. First of all, we're starting by saying you're not having to sanitize any information. You're taking it directly when it's available, in whatever form it's available, from the functional area. The other thing is, it's not it's not a database, it's a layer.
Right.
It's a layer. It's a powerful tool that is absorbing the information, but it's absorbing it based on your question. So your question is what directs it to look in a certain place to see what's there. And if you ask it well, it will go to the right place and pull it, and it'll go out here and pull market information. It'll go back and pull supplier information if you have access to it, or it can go out into the marketplace and say, let me estimate what the supplier information might be if I don't have it real time. So it's not a fixed thing, because somebody could say, well, Deirdre is prompt engineering. Well, no, it's not. Again, it's not static, since this is a layer that connects to all of these information and can make sense of it and process it, but looks for it based on how you talk about it. Then one of the most important things you can do is first figure out what does it have access to? So it's got to be around what you need. So you want to position the model properly. And this is where, instead of the model qualifying you, you're qualifying the model. You need to treat the model just like a great sales exec or a great biz dev exec would treat a potential client. You have to say, what do you have access to? And based on what you know you want to have the answer be. And then you query that and then position the model to then get ready to go get it. And this is what we mean, Deirdre, about the research phase. It's not you're going looking for an answer that's the ultimate answer. You want to know what the layer knows. What can it get at, right? This capability. And then once you know that, then you can provide a little bit narrower view. But if you go get it too narrow too fast, it'll pick and choose the way it sees best. And you don't want to do that. You always want to be ahead. Now, how do you know that? You only know that if you're an expert in the functions. So this is where you have to have this functional knowledge. And by the way, if the functions didn't work well, if we didn't have the people doing that job and making sure that the clocks work fine on time, the trains run on time, if it doesn't work. So you need both the functional capability, but you need to have knowledge of how do you do this librarian work, but in an incredibly broad scope that deals with very narrow functional expertise. So that's what's different. It's dynamic. It's not you're pulling information and creating this vast amount of data. No, it's going out and looking for it. And so it's not static. You're not sanitizing information. You're not giving it a set of known questions to ask because you don't know from day to day what access it has, what information it has, because it's getting real-time updates. If it's not from your business, it's from the marketplace, if you have it set up that way. So being able to know all this and being able to then know what is it that it's doing and having that knowledge is critical for you to be able to direct that machine to now give you what you want. So I've now given you a core dump on my way of looking at it, Deirdre. So you can see now why the question matters enormously. And not only the question matters, but my knowledge of the functions matter. So if I were going to say, if to answer the university president that is asking me, what's different about this? Why can I not just say we're doing this in our comp sci area or our engineering school? And I'm saying, no, no, no. This is not static work. Those people have to work in what you and I would call the deterministic world. 2 + 2 has to equal 4. In this world, you're looking for information and then trying to figure out what is that equation and how can I best estimate that equation that has an enormous amount of judgment in it and is getting vast amounts of data from both inside and outside the organization or the environment. So that's the fundamental difference. And you can see having this functional expertise along with this ability to work this way is really important. So I'm going to turn it back to you at this point and let you take the discussion to the next level.
Okay. Well, let's start with, I think the other point you have to make with the university presidents is that what people need to learn is how to ask questions. And
Yes.
this comes out of not just the comp sci and engineering courses, it comes out of any courses. That when you approach a body of knowledge, you learn how to, or you should learn how to structure that body of knowledge and get at aspects of that body of knowledge that interest you. You learn how to ask the questions in relation to that particular body of knowledge, which could be
Yes.
different. You need to learn, what is knowledge like in this area? Is it numbers? Is it words? Is it pictures? Do people do case studies? Do they write something different? Do they solve problems? How do you ask the questions to do that work in this body of knowledge? And when you do that, when you're getting an education across multiple courses, in effect, then you get to develop a broad sense of how do you interact with information? How do you ask questions about any body of information? How do you solve problems? Which is, we're defining this as a key executive skill. One of the things that executives, and particularly leaders, need to learn to do when working with AI models is to be able to apply this ability to ask questions about any field of information and get the responses that are useful back. So you're talking about functional knowledge? Absolutely. I'm also talking in terms of, I don't know what to call it, education skills, questioning skills, inquiry skills. Or maybe we use the term work fluency. That's another term that people have asked about, that you and I have used in the past few podcasts. And we define work fluency as knowing how to get up out of your functional silo and use one of these AI models to tap into this AI insight layer to get the information, insights, connections, data, anything else you need to come up with something at the end. And the way you come up with it is knowing how to interact with the information to get the output you need. to do something good for the company or organization or university, whatever you're doing there. So this is what university presidents need to know, that they're not simply teaching people how to use AI models, they're teaching the truly basic skill of how to ask questions, which is fundamental to this work. And I
And if
know
we were
you,
going to summarize, Deirdre, we first went down this path by talking about it's a shift from where the value is in the knowledge
right,
it's really now more the value is how to make use of that knowledge. And
correct.
you call that difference between the two of these is the difference between the functional capability and work fluency. And this is the librarian capability, right? It's that work fluency. How do I now make sense of all this change that's occurred in the market from scarcity of information to now abundance of information? Then we talked about the second piece is, so what is this capability doing for me, right? And we talked about it being this flexible, incredibly powerful layer that can reach through and grab everything. And the difference between that and just pure search is pure search has a deterministic approach to going after the data. It's an equation that it's following. It's not a predictive equation, it's a deterministic. And what I mean by that is 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4, where AI models fundamentally are built to ask a prediction question. It is, what if I were to add 2 plus 2? Does that give you 4? And it would say, well, it depends on the condition, right? If I'm quantum mechanics, maybe not. So it approaches the world in a different way. It's a predictive approach rather than a deterministic. It can have huge value. And this is your point about work fluency, and it's the reason why you came up with the term fluency, because it's a fluid process. It's not deterministic, but you're using deterministic data to do something different and to answer a different set of questions. So that's what this is. And what is the role of the machine and the human? Well, you're asking the machine at this point to make sense of the information for you based on your way of looking at the problem and your way of qualifying yourself around what it is you're trying to answer, the question you're trying to answer. And then you're saying, well, what is this? What is this role called? And you're saying, well, it's almost a discipline of inquiry, right? It's a whole thing about how do I ask questions? And that is a higher level skill than doing it functionally. It's now saying, I need to be able to ask not only deterministic questions, but also this predictive questions, these work fluency kind of questions. In some cases, combine the two at the same time. So that's what that third piece of this is. And that leads you, Deirdre, straight down into a concept that you love, which is this role of the human. So what is the role of the human? So I'm going to turn it over to you to take care of dealing with this.
Well, the human is everything. In this partnership, remember, they're only dumb AI models unless the human drives it. And I'm laughing when I'm saying that because you and I both know that these models can do incredible things, but they need the human to make their output sensible, to make their output usable. It's just output. And that output could be anything. If that output is not the right output, it could lead people very astray. Whether you're a person or an organization or a university or a scholar or whatever. So it is the human who takes the capability of the models and drives them by asking the right questions, knowing where you're going, having the background of knowledge so you can make sense of what the machine is coming up with, and then driving it in a way so that you get output that's useful. As you were talking before, I was remembering, you've got me on this university train of thought here. One of my history professors at Stanford always said, look, and this was many decades before these models were available. Look, you can always look up a date. What you need to know are the themes in history that make that date important. And that's how you have to think about these models. Look, you can search on anything. You can come up with anything, whatever date you need, whatever point of information, whatever description you need. What you need to know are the underlying themes that make that right or wrong as an answer for you. Could come up with a date, but it may not be the date you need. Could come up with a description, but it may not be the description you need. What do you need? And that's the context of what you're asking from, which includes not only organizational information, business information, competitive marketplace information, or whatever, but also your own knowledge and judgment that you have accumulated as a leader over your years in business. We talk about this as mindset, the mindset of a leader, and how leaders always have to develop their mindset, keep their mindsets fresh. In fact, Tom, you and I talk about how a daily use of AI models can help leaders keep their mindsets fresh, set up a morning query, good morning model. What happens in the world today in these fields that I should know about? And if you've already set up a context for that model, then the model should be able to sort through all of the information out there and come back with 10 items that you need to know this morning. So that's another side of the whole thing. But it's the human that sets the context for the machine, asks the questions that drive the machine, and then the human takes the output from the machine and finalizes the output based on context, knowledge, judgment, instincts, all of those human characteristics, which we also put in framework as leadership characteristics, Tom. We define these as leadership characteristics, and we've done podcasts in the past on going through the leadership characteristics. So that's why when we're talking about the use of these AI models, which you and I both agree can be very valuable, we also talk about the human and machine partnership and the need to ask questions and the need to understand what the machine is doing and what its output represents, and all of those other things we've been talking about and will, by the way, talk about in depth and answering some questions from readers over the next couple of weeks about how do you actually do this? How do you actually think about that? So, having said that, Tom, back to you.
So that was the next element is this, okay, so what's the role of the human? And what Deirdre's describing is you have a responsibility as a leader to stay in front of the machines. Don't let the machines get in front of you. You have to direct the use of these machines. And the only way you're going to know how to do that is use them for complex work, because you'd never know these things. And so let me give you a very interesting example. And then Deirdre, I'd like you to give the example you used to me. So I got a very interesting answer from a question I asked the machine the other day. So I asked the machine, I was working on something and it was complex and it was difficult and it was lengthy. And I asked it a question. I said, should I start a new chat? Because we've been going on a while. So I got this message from the machine. This chat is long. I'm carrying a significant amount of context, and while I can still work effectively, there are two risks as we continue. First, the further we go, the more likely I am to lose precision on earlier decisions. Specific version numbers, exact phrasing we locked in, structural choices we made along the way. The memory system captures the most important things, but it does not capture everything at the granular level this work requires. Now, I got that from the model, and I'm using the top end of this capability for one of the vendors that if I said the name, you would know, that's expensive per month. Mm-hmm. So this isn't that I'm using a low-level model. it didn't volunteer that. It told that to me because I started getting worried. And I started getting worried because I detected the work was getting sloppy. And Deirdre, you said, yes. Let me tell you why this bothers me.
Well, it bothers me because and this is a very serious point right now, that we hear about people using these chatbots, in other words, these models, as human companions and chatting for hours with the chatbots, and then taking action based on the output from the chatbots. Well, if someone is having a 3 hour conversation, even just a 2 hour conversation with one of these models, which I understand is not infrequent, then think about what this means in terms of the machine's capability of keeping the conversation within bounds. That it could really lead people astray because it's gotten tired, because it's not keeping track of the rules, the way the things, the guidelines, what's been set up, what's been talked about previously. And I was wondering whether this was a cause of, or potential cause of, problems between humans and machines. So it's always something to keep in mind that these are, even though we think of machines as reliable as your car, which you could drive for 3 days without stopping, these are digital tools which decay over time, change over time, and must be used very carefully if you're going to stay in line. And some of this all comes back to, are people knowing that they have to ask the right questions? Because I worry about people not asking the right questions, but that's a whole other
Well,
train
think
of
about
thought.
this, Deirdre. When you and I have taught business modeling, one of the things we taught, or you know, some of our compatriots, including a good friend of mine, taught was check functions.
Yes,
Now, why do we do that? Because the human can make mistakes in how they design these things.
right.
So to be able to make sure you, as the human, didn't make mistakes. Why did we do that? Because the models are deterministic. We needed to make sure that 2 plus 2 did equal 4 in that model.
Right.
And if you designed it wrong in Excel, which is the tool we were using at the time, because it's deterministic, if you've written no, 2 plus 3, and you're expecting 4, you may not know that unless you do the check function that checks to see, is it giving me 4? If it's not, what's wrong? It's the other way around here. It's that you're the check function.
Correct.
And the point is, you're not dealing with a deterministic model.
Right.
You don't have 4 showing up on the screen. But if you dealt with it with these kind of words, it's telling you, I can no longer tell you that I'm perfectly reliable. Going down the path we were going down, the work we were doing, which was really complicated because it involved numbers and it involved words. And you could see it was getting concerned, but it didn't tell me that. I had to ask that question. Uh, and and by the way, I know how hard it is to move complex work from one chat to another. I do understand all that. It's not easy, but you have to do it for the reasons we just talked about. Now, what is that? That's Deirdre, that's the point you make about you have a responsibility as the leader of the machine to look for this and to anticipate it and do it because you are using these things this way or you've seen it being used this way. And this point about you're in charge of not only leading it, but directing the machine because you're invoking this complex capability, this which we think can be wonderful, but you own the final result. So if it's using it in the wrong way, you own it. And this is the point that these models are very different. This is why you and I say that we understand when universities have a really difficult time because they not only have to teach the functional piece, but they need to be teaching a not need to, but we'd like to have them be teaching this work fluency capability. And we know how hard that is because we designed a course around that and did it for years at Columbia, where we actually had it. It was 2 different courses. I mean, it was one course, but it was 2 courses that worked in parallel. Half the course was on the functional, and the other half was on the work fluency piece. Very hard because it assumed a lot of functional knowledge prior to them doing this, and sometimes they didn't come with that. And you can't, not only can't you do this work, you can't do this work if you don't have that solid aspect. Regardless, I can see where you have real problems with people using it in the functions and using it as a way of being a pure productivity tool, just spitting back the answer, whether that be a 10-page paper on a subject or whatever, where we're talking about, no, we're talking about this piece is what we're talking about. So I do understand how the use is hard here, although we believe there are some really easy ways to deal with that because we deal with it ourselves versus using it like this. Both are fascinating problems that I'm sure the universities are not thinking they're fascinating at the moment, but they are interesting problems to deal with. But Deirdre, this idea of the discipline of inquiry is not something that you and I popped up recently. It's actually at the core of what a university does.
It is. I mean, and neither of us has mentioned the name Socrates yet, but we might as well, since we're talking about core of universities, bring him in. That I'm sure most of our listeners have read some of the Socratic dialogues, and if you want to see the power of knowing how to ask questions, just see what Socrates does to his poor followers there, who thought they were giving a right answer. Read machine in there. And then Socrates comes back with something and they have to change their whole way of thinking about it. So, look at those dialogues. But yes, this is supposed to be at the core of universities. And I truly hope that it remains a focus, I'll put it that way, going forward.
And just look at, you're in my favorite, although I think Stanford vies for your loyalty, just like Columbia does. But we love Columbia, and I have the same love for Wake Forest that gave me my start. The that Columbia, its undergraduates work on the great books curriculum. And part of that is when you work your way through, starting with Homer, and you work your way through, you deal with this. So this is not a new idea for any university, is the development of the intellectual strength of the human being. And we're just saying this is a wonderful thing because now the questions that you're really putting into going at the AI model is much more of a Socratic approach. And this discipline of inquiry that we're talking about is much more of a Socratic approach to dealing with it. And that, even if you don't have any founding in Socrates or philosophy or ancient philosophy, you don't need to do this. It's just being able to adapt the question in a way that furthers the way that a person thinks about the subject. It's a very hard thing to do well. This idea of asking questions in a Socratic approach. But, this gets down to, Deirdre, what the marketplace is valuing today. And so take that subject for us and talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of what is the marketplace, thinking in terms of business, we'll stay on business. But if you're thinking about, I'm at a university, I'm putting young people through something to get them ready to go lead a productive life. Now, we're not trying to talk about going to be a classicist or whatever, right? Or a medical doctor or whatever. We're talking about into the marketplace of fundamentally commercial life.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like when you look at it today?
Well, you can't pick up a newspaper without reading about another university setting up a department of AI, teaching people how to use AI, assuming that people will be hired to do AI. But I think it's something, a couple of things a little different. One is that if you think about AI not as a profession, but as an enabling skill, then I think employers are going to be looking for AI, can you work with these models and not with them in what we call a tool sense, a basic do a search or draft a thank you note to grandma or anything like that. It's do you know how to do this deep work that you and I have been talking about for the past several months? I think that's going to be a skill that people are looking for. So yes, learn how to do this AI. I think it's actually at the point of becoming an expectation where people are going to be expected to know how to do these models, to do various work. Now, whether the employer knows about doing the advanced work we're talking about is a different thing, but you'd better be able to walk into the employer and say, oh yes, I've used X model to do X, and here's, look at this report I generated, look at this chat stream, look at whatever you have as that. I think that's the most important thing. I think also you're hearing about a lot of different ways that educational institutions are trying to figure out how to use AI, everything from planning curriculum to grading to doing deep research to writing reports, except that I think all professors are trying to figure out ways to make sure that people aren't substituting the use of these models for thought. That's the other big thing. That I understand blue books are selling more quickly than they've sold for a long time, just so people are going to be made to handwrite exam answers or oral exams or teamwork or projects or things like that. That it's a mistake for students to substitute the use of machines, even if they're learning to use the machines, for actually learning to think, learning subject matter, that it is equally, if not more important, in fact, I would say more important, to learn how to do the real subject work, to do the inquiry, to approach an area, than to learn to use a model. It's actually fairly simple to pick up how to use a model if you work with it for a while, but you've got to have the basics of learning how to approach a field without a model so that you can do the model work appropriately.
So if you said to me, based on everything we've talked about, what would I actually say if I only had 5 minutes with the university president? The one thing I would say is the market is rewarding right now the ability to use all resources at the highest level. That's what they're rewarding.
Correct.
And all means not just to use these AI models, but to use them in complex work and functional work. And
Correct.
so not only that, but it's to be able to put all of the other characteristics that we value that we might think of as being either a business skill or a political skill or a social skill. It's to put judgment, experience, and context around the use of these because they can reach so far. So
Right.
understanding geopolitical aspects when you're looking at marketplaces and so forth matter, the risks and so forth. So I don't want to say too many words there. But that's it. It's around using all the resources they have available and using them at the highest level. That we think AI models can and they should be able to provide incredible leverage in this equation. And so understanding how to use that and to be able to use it both vertically, functionally, and to use it across inside the organizations and out to produce something or whatever that function is you're dealing with. And extracting that is the role of what a good human does in a role like this. It's extracting the information in a right way and then be able to apply the necessary human skills of judgment, experience, and leadership to that with the right context to make it valuable. And that's a hard thing to do. That is not an easy set of business. And if I were going to pick any institution to be able to help produce people that can work in that environment, a university's environment is the best. It really is. And there's where you can say the better the university, the more it focuses on really serious work, is where this will be developed. So that's how I look at this subject. Now, if you're interested, I'm going to be by now I will have published a paper on this called, what is the actual title I'm using? What I would tell a university president about AI. That's kind of
Right.
an easy title, Deirdre. I'm
Right.
also writing a book that supports this that'll be out during the summer sometime. But this is the reason why I thought this is important is because this is a case study. This is a case study. And if you're trying to figure out how do I use this in my business, you can listen to this because a, the environment that we're talking about, the application, is the same thing you do in a business. It's developing your people and developing it in the same way we've talked about how a university would look at this. So this applies just everything we've said, every word we've said applies just as much to an entrepreneurial business or an institutional business, a government entity, a not-for-profit entity, as it does to a university.
Mhm.
So I'll leave this with you, Deirdre, to close down for us.
Well, Tom, that I always like to combine and make relevant all of the different topics we talk about, bring everything to the center. So I'm going to close on the notion of humans as a check function here by reminding people about our basic three questions, which are, what am I missing? What are the motivations of everyone involved? And then is time my friend or enemy? The most important ones for the check function are, of course, the first two. But it's always good when you're working with a model, finalizing the output before you turn it in or act on it, to just pause and say, what am I missing? And what are the motivations in any of this that I haven't taken into account yet? And then that'll help you to get great output that you can then use to the benefit of your business.
Deirdre, one of the things we didn't do is we put aside three questions somebody could ask us. Why hasn't this already been done? And then what is prompt engineering and how does that differ? And then how does this work in a classroom or a business? Well, we'll answer those questions differently as time goes on, but
Right.
I'll assure you that the answers to those will tell you what we talked about today still matters. The only one that may be worth a second, Deirdre, is this thing about the difference in prompt engineering. And what is the difference? And I'll just tell you quickly. Prompt engineering is a form of productivity. It's a way of being able to do something repeatedly in a certain way. And so it really is valuable if you're having an automated function you're setting up with an AI engine, because it's your ability to tell that engine how to function. It's a form of programming, and it's a form of programming and verbal language, much like if you ever learned the language COBOL, it's the similar thing. You're telling it in a human language how to do something. And the easiest one to learn, if you want to learn it, is Claude Cowork. And you can tell it what to do in an automated way and create these things called skills, which are AI agents that go off and do stuff. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about this broad capability. So is prompt engineering valuable? Absolutely. But it's valuable in this area, not so much this. Now there are exceptions to every rule, but that's fundamentally the answer to that one. I thought we ought to deal with that. The others we can pick up elsewhere. So, Deirdre, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom. So long for now.